Austin Root is here for you, your favorite Australia guy.
If someone says they're on $200,000 a year, the first question should be, is that plus super or including super? Because in Australia, those are not the same thing. With the super guarantee now at 12%, a $200,000 package including super is really closer to $8,571 in salary, plus $21,429 in super, and then tax, Medicare, and maybe a help debt come out on top of that. So when people ask, how much do you need to earn to be considered rich in Australia? The honest answer is, it depends what you mean by rich. And by the end of this video, you'll know the income numbers that sound rich, the ones that actually feel rich, and why wealth matters more than the headline salary. But wait, before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff. Comment "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. Let's start with the biggest misunderstanding. People use the word rich to mean at least three different things. Sometimes they mean high income. Sometimes they mean expensive lifestyle. And sometimes they mean actual wealth, as in, you own meaningful assets, your costs are under control, and your money keeps working even when you're not. Those are very different things. A single person on $120,000 with low rent, no debt, and money going into super and ETFs may feel far better off than a couple earning $220,000 with a giant mortgage, childcare, 2 cars, private school ambitions, and a help debt still hanging around. Same country, very different reality. So before we put a number on rich, we need a baseline. What does a normal income actually look like in Australia? The reason this matters is simple. If your benchmark comes from TikTok, LinkedIn, or your mate in tech sales, your view of money gets distorted fast. In the actual numbers, the median taxable income in Australia in 22-23 was $50,868, the median personal income was $58,016, and the median employee income was $61,966. Meanwhile, full-time adult average weekly ordinary time earnings were $2,051. In late 2025, about $106,657 a year, but that's an average, and it only covers full-time adults, which pushes the number up. So straight away, something important clicks. A salary of $100,000 is not ordinary. It's well above the middle. That doesn't automatically make you rich, but it does mean you're already well past what many Australians personally earn. And that matters because a lot of people talk about 6 figures as if it's the bare minimum to survive. In some households and postcodes, it can absolutely feel tight, but nationally, it is still a strong income. Now, if you want practical markers, there are 3 income levels worth remembering. $100,000, $135,000, $190,000. Here's why. At around $100,000, you are clearly above the median and usually living in what most people would call a high income range for an individual. At $135,000, you move into the 37% marginal tax bracket. And at $190,000, you move into the top 45% marginal tax bracket, not counting the 2% Medicare levy. But this is where people usually get confused. Moving into a higher tax bracket does not mean all your income gets taxed at that higher rate. Only the dollars above the threshold do. That sounds small, but it changes how people think about earning more. A lot of Australians still act like crossing a threshold somehow wipes out the benefit of a raise. It doesn't. If you go from $189,000 to $191,000, you don't suddenly get smashed on the whole amount. Only the income above $190,000 gets taxed at that top marginal rate. So if you want one clean answer to the title, here it is. By income alone, many Australians would probably look at around $190,000 plus for an individual and say, yes, that sounds rich. But in real life, that answer still breaks down fast, because gross income is not lifestyle. Let's do a simple comparison. On $100,000, using current resident tax rates, you're roughly looking at a take-home income in the high $70,000 before anything like a help repayment is factored in. On $150,000, your take-home is roughly in the low $110,000s. On $200,000, it's roughly around $140,000. So yes, more income absolutely helps. But notice what happens. Each extra jump in gross pay turns into a smaller jump in actual spendable money after tax. And if your housing costs rise with your income, you may not feel dramatically richer at all. And this is the part that affects real decisions. If you have a help debt, repayments kick in once your annual income is above $67,000 in 2025-26. That means 2 people on the same salary can have different take-home pay depending on whether one of them is still repaying university debt. If you're renting in a cheaper area with no dependents, $120,000 can feel very solid. If you've got a mortgage in Sydney or Melbourne, 2 kids in care 3 days a week, private health insurance, and one income temporarily carrying the household, even $200,000 can feel less like rich and more like we're doing okay, but we still have to think. That's why the question isn't just, how much do you earn? It's also, what are your fixed costs? What debts are attached to that income? How much of that income turns into assets instead of disappearing each month? And there's one more detail people miss all the time. Salary package versus salary plus super. This matters because Australians compare income numbers that aren't actually the same. If one person says they earn $200,000 and that's plus super, that's one thing. If another person says they're on a $200,000 package including super, that's smaller than it sounds. At was 12% edurate, that works out to roughly $178,571 salary and $21,429 super. Same headline, different reality. That sounds like a technical detail, but it changes the whole comparison. Because when Australians talk about who's rich, they often compare pre-tax with after-tax, salary with package, individual income with household income, and income with wealth as if they're all the same thing. They're not. And this is where the conversation gets more useful. If you want to know who's actually in a strong financial position, wealth usually tells you more than income. The ABS's latest detailed household wealth survey showed means household $0 million, but the median was $579,200. That gap matters. It means the average is being pulled up by wealthier households, so the typical household is well below the average. That's a great example of why someone can look rich on paper, but not feel it. Averages make Australia look very wealthy. Medians tell you what the middle actually looks like. And in real life, the Australians who often feel rich are not always the ones with the flashiest salaries. They're often the ones with a paid-off or manageable home, decent super, low consumer debt, cash in and offset, investments outside super, and enough margin in the month that one surprise bill doesn't throw everything off. That matters because income buys comfort, but assets buy flexibility. A high salary can stop tomorrow. A mortgage offset keeps saving interest. A diversified ETF portfolio can keep compounding. Super can keep growing quietly in the background. And a paid-off home changes everything about how much income you actually need. A very practical way to think about this is retirement. MoneySmart, using ASFA-based figures, says a comfortable retirement lifestyle is around $54,840 a year for a single and $77,375 for a couple, and the estimated lump sums to support that are around $630,000 for a single and $730,000 for a couple, assuming home ownership and a partial age pension. That doesn't mean those numbers equal rich, but it does show something important. The financial end goal for a lot of Australians is not earn the biggest salary possible. It's to build enough assets that work reduces from mandatory to optional, and that's a much better definition of rich. So here's the practical framework. If you're earning below 6 figures, the focus is usually not on looking rich. It's on getting breathing room, stabilize cash flow, build an emergency fund, get expensive debt under control, and improve earning power. If you're in the 100K to 190K range, this is often where people either build real wealth or quietly waste the opportunity. Because this is the zone where you can usually start converting income into assets, extra into the mortgage or offset, concessional super contributions if appropriate, broad, low-cost ETFs over time, clearing bad debt, avoiding lifestyle inflation every time income rises. And if you're on 190K plus, the main risk often stops being not enough money and becomes lifestyle creep. Bigger mortgage, more subscriptions, better car, more dining out, more private school pressure, more holidays designed to match your peer group. So the income looks rich, but the actual freedom never arrives. That is the trap. The Australians who get genuinely wealthy are usually not the ones trying to look rich the earliest. They're the ones who keep enough of a gap between what they earn and what they spend long enough for assets to build underneath them. So, what's the final answer? If you mean high income relative to the typical Australian, then even $100,000 is clearly strong. If you want a practical, this is getting seriously high marker. $135,000 plus is useful because you're well above the middle and into a higher marginal bracket. And if you want a simple line where many people would say yes, that sounds rich for an individual income, around $190,000 plus is a fair benchmark. But if you mean financially secure, flexible, and genuinely hard to knock over, income alone is not enough. In Australia, rich usually looks more like this: a strong income, plus low or controlled fixed costs, plus meaningful super, plus growing assets, plus debt that isn't strangling your cash flow. That's the difference between earning rich and being rich. So I'm curious what income level feels rich to you in Australia, and do you think that number changes once you factor in housing, debt, and super?